Paperback Rocker, episode 99. Hey, this is Matt Severson, the Paperback Rocker, and I'm broadcasting from my 6x9 foot cinder block shack in the desert of northern Mexico, southern Texas. Welcome and thanks for checking out my show.
Read Black Dog, the only book that combines backmasking, a werewolf, and a Scottish Terrier.
Hey everybody, what's up? It's your old friend, that long-lost Paperback Rocker, back again with episode 99, volume 43, I believe, of the Blue Whiskey novel, which I will be reading once again. And we have crept we are on the penultimate episode as far as our counting of 100, which means the episode right before number 100. And you can feel the electricity in the air already, although it may take a while before I get to episode 100 because I just took somewhat of a hiatus over the Christmas holiday and a little after, mainly because I got a new puppy, a black Scottish Terrier, of course, named Black Betty. And she is a good dog. She's been a little bit of a handful through this early time. So I have not put out my regular episodes. I have not recorded music like I have been for a while. So I'm just getting back into both. I have a new song coming out real soon called Dead Presidents. It's a vocal tour de force. And you can check out my last song called Gun in My Hand and put my band in your playlist, Saturn Lander. That's me. I record under that name as the band, Saturn Lander. Mainly because my name is too hard for people to understand or pronounce or read or spell or anything. But maybe you know how to do it. It's Matt Severson, the Paperback Rocker. And I have returned after this hiatus with yet another volume, another installment of the Blue Whiskey novel. And you can hear that little Scottish Terrier in the background, maybe, depending on the cancellation properties of this microphone. But, yeah, you'll probably be hearing her a lot on future episodes. So, when we last read, I believe we were on page 236. We are nearing the end. We have about, about 80 pages left. Okay? So, when we last read, on page 236, our hero and his team of associates were getting ready to begin. I think we were just starting the recording of our hero Stanton Wheelhouse III's first album, major label album, that is, third overall. He has self-released 2 albums. And once again, when last we read, the producer, who goes by the British name of Lord Brighton Rock, and the engineer, whose name is Jeff, have knocked on the door because the studio time has officially become that of Stanton Wheelhouse III. And when Lord Brighton knocked on the door, Paul Simon appeared and said, "Don't worry, you'll get your time, Mr. Brighton. Just give us a few minutes. We want to wrap up recording The Sound of Silence," or whatever they were doing. Okay? So I'll just read that last little passage. Suddenly, Lord Brighton stood up and said, "Right, it's 10:01. They're on my time now. I will not stand for it." He strode over to the door and started beating on it. "You're on my time," he yelled over and over. Whoops. The door opened and Paul Simon stood there looking apologetic. "Sorry, mister, but can you give us 5 more minutes? I'll see that you get all your studio time." 5 minutes, no more," commanded Lord Brighton. He was resolute, even in the face of celebrity. Mr. Simon shut the door, and Lord Brighton turned around and made an hilarious face at me and Jeff. "That was Paul Simon," he whispered, then nodded furiously with his mouth wide open. "I just told Paul Simon off." We are definitely a team, I thought. The door was no doubt soundproofed like every other surface of a recording studio, but we heard screams of rage blast from the other side of it. "God damn it, I will murder them!" It's so hard on my voice. "Art, please settle down." This was recognizable as Paul Simon's silky voice, although he was speaking loudly. "I'll rip their nuts off and eat them raw." The door flew open, and the 3 of us braced ourselves. Paul Simon and 2 other men tumbled out in chaotic fashion, struggling to keep Art Garfunkel from us. It was all they could do to restrain him. His eyes blazed, his teeth gnashed, and his curly hair stuck straight up like he'd been pulling on it. "I will destroy your lives," he exhorted, as he was dragged by the other men out the lounge's exterior door. It was shut behind him, and there was sudden silence, almost like what Simon and Garfunkel liked to sing about. "Right, let's get to work," said Lord Brighton, as if nothing had happened. Jeff lowered his head in a workmanlike manner and followed Lord Brighton into the control room. I stood where I was, frozen in disbelief. It was one of the last times I ever felt that way, because from that day forward, similar episodes were almost the norm. And it wasn't always somebody else behaving in that manner. Sometimes it was me. I picked up my guitar case and followed inside, closing the door behind me. The 3 of us were in the control room of the recording studio now. "Go in the studio with Jeff, and he'll begin microphone placement." "Okay," I said to Lord Brighton. He was running the show now, and I was happy for once to relinquish control, but only because I had complete confidence in him. About 10 minutes later, there was a soft knock from the outer lounge, which I heard due to the door between the control room and the studio being open. Lord Brighton opened it, and once again it was Paul Simon. I couldn't hear what Mr. Simon said, but he made a slight pointing motion toward me, and Lord Brighton stepped aside to allow him to pass. My heart skipped a beat as he entered the studio. He came up to me and spoke softly. He is a very soft-spoken man. "I'm Paul Simon. You're Stanton Wheelhouse III. I've heard about you." He extended his small hand, and I shook it gently, smiling. He said, "I'm so sorry about Artie." "Think nothing of it," I said. "It only assures that I'll never forget my first recording session in a real studio." He smiled. "You're a glass half full guy. I am too." I beamed back like a blissful idiot. "It's the black beauties," he said. "I hate them, but Art, well, you just witnessed how he reacts to amphetamines. Take what you saw as advice. I hope you've never even heard of those stupid pills." I wish that were true. "So you have experience with them?" "Of the most immediate and easily remembered type. A night with Johnny Cash." "Holy shit," he said. I don't have anything to tell you then. I'm glad to have met you, Stanton Wheelhouse III. That's a great name. Don't ever change it." "I won't. And likewise, Mr. Simon. It's great to meet you. Before you leave, I want you to know something." I wasn't thinking clearly at this point, I will admit. "What's that?" "I won't ever try to copy you. I don't mean I don't like what you do. I'm saying you're an influence, but I'll never try to rip you off. I know you're doing your own thing. I've seen you perform. I was in the back. You couldn't see me. I'm short. Yes, you are, I said, and smiled until the edges of my lips must have touched my earlobes. Paul smiled back, then turned and left. Good luck, Stanton, he called back. Watch out for Johnny Cash. He was gone. And Art Garfunkel, I said to myself. Chapter 20, on page 238. That first night in the studio was tedious but productive. I now know that all time in the studio is tedious, and it better be productive because the bill is always increasing at an almost exponential rate. Those last words are trivial to understand as a recording musician. Many artists' first album, or I don't know what I said. Let me reread that. Those last words are vital to understand as a recording musician. Many artists' first albums are tracked over 2 or 3 nights a week. 2 or 3 nights or a week, like mine, but later albums become 6-month or longer occupations of some expensive studio. Wars are completed faster than a Metallica album, to use a modern reference. And not to sound harpy, but the artist is paying for it all right off the top. Can you tell I learned that lesson the hard way? Back to that first night in the studio. It didn't take long. It didn't take but a few hours before we were laying down some basic tracks. The multi-track recording process was new to me, and I soaked up every move Lord Brighton and Jeff made like a guitar-playing sponge. The first playback of a guitar-only run-through of Eternal Flame through the studio monitors nearly had me in tears. I half expected butterflies to flutter out of the speakers. I stood there with my mouth half opening like I was witnessing Christ. Sounds like shit, Lord Brighton. Sounds like shit, Lord Brighton, called Jeff, whose head was inside a Leslie speaker cabinet. He wasn't doing anything other than examining the machine close up. A Leslie rotating speaker makes a guitar or organ or even a voice sound spacey. But describing a sound is very difficult. Jimmy Page used one on the guitar solo on their very first album track, Good Times, Bad Times. Listening to that will serve us both better than me trying to describe the speaker's effect. Sounds like shit, Lord Brighton, Jeff said louder when he got no response from the record producer. You don't have to tell me that, Lord Brighton roared, but he wasn't mad. I closed my mouth slowly, eyes wide but unseeing. I was in a state of shock. The butterflies floating around the studio spontaneously combusted. What did I do wrong? I asked in a plaintive voice. I had played as well as I could and was devastated at their assessment. What are you talking about? Came from inside the Leslie. This cabinet is amazing. I can't play it any better than that, I said, and it sounded like shit according to you guys. Your playing had nothing to do with it, said Lord Brighton. His words came to me over an intercom. This was another first. I looked through the smoky glass into the control room. Lord Brighton waved at me. He saw my confused expression and made an exaggerated display of pressing the talkback button and spoke. You can hear me in the studio when I speak over the intercom, Stanton. He smiled, amused by my inexperience. This was the way he liked to work, without overly controlling artists who think they know a thing or two about recording. On that night I was as green as they come, and he was asserting his dominance like an alpha dog. How do you hear me? I asked. You're in a recording studio, he said. Surrounded by microphones. I felt like an idiot, but I was a happy idiot, so it was okay. I played the same chords over and over hundreds of times, and Jeff and Lord Brighton adjusted things to what seemed a microscopic level. At some point, I began to think they were wasting studio time. An hour after that, I said something about it. "It sounds great. Let's lay down some tracks." Jeff's head popped up from below the enormous mixer in the control room. Lord Brighton was standing at the same board, twiddling knobs and faders like God at the time of creation. He and Jeff made overly exaggerated faces at me that informed me of how nonsensical my suggestion was. Communicating nonverbally through glass tends to make people turn into silent film actors, thus the exaggeration. They went back to work without a syllable of explanation to me, and I felt like the least important part of the process. If this was what recording in a fancy studio was, I didn't like it. Okay, that's a perfect place to stop. And that is just right on the bottom of page 239 in the novel Blue Whiskey, available via Amazon by looking up my name or searching for my books, Blue Whiskey, Black Dog, Band on the Run, and Running on Empty. My mom has a book called Wildflowers and Broken Gods, which has been very successful and well-liked. And if you want to ever get a book personalized, signed by me, drop me a line at paperbackrocker@live.com. Well, I will be expecting deliveries of all manner celebratory gifts commemorating episode 100 of the Paperback Rocker podcast, which will be coming to you in approximately 1 week. So until then, you have a great week. Enjoy your life and listen to some good music. Ignore the news. And I will see you in a week for episode 100 of the Paperback Rocker Show.
The Paperback Rocker has signed off.